Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life. And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpadar.
Welcome back to another episode of the Orthodontic Pearls podcast. With me, as always, are my co-hosts, Dr. Chris Teeters and Brian Anderson. And how are you guys doing today?
Great. Just got back from a soccer game for my son. It's fun. Springtime, people are getting more active, and it's fun to see our kids out there getting more comfortable with team sports and just whatever they're doing. So life's good over here.
Speaking of comfortable, I noticed you're wearing my favorite sweatshirt right now. Is that Nike?
You gave it to me, bro.
Yeah. I love it.
I recognize that.
I don't love the team on there, but the Salute to Service collection is just my absolute favorite that the NFL has put out. Like that army green color, and the sweatshirt itself is just the most comfortable one I've ever had.
Very comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it, man. My favorite sweatshirt.
Looking good. Mine too. All right, Chris, how are you doing?
Feeling great, man. Just recovering from all the carb loading you and I did last night with Jacob Coke over some good pizza. That was a good time. So
that was fun.
Definitely good to connect.
Now, so Jacob Coke, he's been on the show before. Big practice down in Georgia, and just like a really, really good guy. Lots of interesting background, very philosophical. Now, we went to a pizza place, but I think you ordered some kind of seafood. Was it like crab or salmon, or what did you get exactly?
I got the salmon. It was
salmon.
Good. Very good.
Yeah. That was a pretty fun evening. We were talking a little bit about workout routines, as always comes up. You guys were bodybuilders. And
yep.
I think that you said, one of your favorite workouts was the crab walk. Is that right?
Well, I think it's a good way to tone your arms, as you're walking across. And it's just a different way to change things up. So definitely try the crab walk. It's a good one.
Keeps it interesting. But it works with different muscles that you're not typically working. But I found that the older I get, my joints just can't handle that kind of stuff. So I need to stick to the more traditional things. And Brian, now I know you're a big supplement guy. I think you probably take stuff for your joints. Now there's something you take that's it's derived from shellfish. Was it lobster, crab, something like that? There's what is that? Chondroitin, is that what it's called?
So I'm not taking that now, but I've done it in the past. Honestly, right now, I'm just doing fish oil with high EPA. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing 1,000 milligrams of EPA per day in my fish oil supplement. And it's I'm trying to adhere to the use it or lose it principle. Mm-hmm. You have to engage your joints. You have to engage rotations that your normal lifestyle is not going to do if you want to have continued mobility in those joints. Mm-hmm. And so going back to, doing different exercises, I think it's important to kind of push yourself a little bit because our normal day-to-day in the office is not going to engage the joints in a way that they're going to be useful, late into our 50s, 60s, that type of stuff. And so that's just become more readily apparent to me the older I get that I'm not going to dodge the bullet. In my late 30s, I'm like, man, I feel still really good. I still don't feel old. I think maybe I might just be aging really well. And I might not get sore because you hear people talking about their backs hurting and this and that. And I'm like, no, definitely didn't avoid it. But you can mitigate it and minimize the difficulties or the pain or whatever. So I think, you just got to do stuff you don't want to do and engage muscles that you normally don't and make sure you're going through full range of motion stuff.
And I think that this is good for our mental health as we get older as well. We always talk about that mind-body connection. If you don't want to be
huge.
A crabby old man who's just, always in a funk, I think that your health, the avoidance of physical pain can really, is really important to that as well. So,
yeah.
Well, really cool, guys. With us today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Mehdi Peikar. And how are you doing today, Mehdi?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me. And sorry, I cannot talk about workouts or supplements. I just do 100 sit-ups every day. That's all I do. I'm not
really.
Guys.
That's pretty impressive, actually.
And I don't.
You do that every day.
I have done it for almost last 2 years. Although these days I'm based on my friend's advice, I'm like changing it a little bit. So like I do like 100 seconds of plank. The other day I do like
that's cool.
Yeah, so I do some 100 thing every day. That's all I do though.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
And zero supplements, Brian. So
No, man, that's really important. Honestly, I think, we can, especially as orthodontists, we tend to have like a perfectionistic complex, and we tend to think more is better. And so more complex is better. But of course, as you focused in your career on systems and simplifying things. And so I think sometimes we have to apply that to our life, that, hey, if your life is such that realistically, that's what that you can complete every day, 100 sit-ups or, a few minutes of planks, and you can execute that. I think the most important thing is consistency. So my hat's off to you, honestly. I think that's really great. And you just have to find the balance where you can,
Yeah.
Hats off to you. But I try just to be consistent, as you said. But, when we say we don't have time for something, means that that's not our priority. So it's
right.
Yeah, if it is our priority, we should find time for it. So I'm trying to get better in this. I feel guilty about it.
Well, I think that was something we were talking about last night, was the idea of maximization versus optimization, and related to that is this 80-20 rule, okay, which is something that I take pretty seriously, so 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort, and then that final 20% typically takes 80% of the effort just to get that last little bit. So someone who specializes in something, like a savant or, an athlete or someone who's really at the top of their game, they do have to put that 100% in because they're playing for those inches. But someone, who's average, or just wants to be healthy, you could put in like maybe a 20% effort and get 80% of the results right off the bat, or maybe a 30% effort to get 85%. But the point is, you only have so much willpower, so much energy throughout the day. Now, I'm not including Chris Teeters in this. He's got an unlimited amount of willpower and energy. But, for those of us mortals, everything that we invest into one aspect of our lives does have to come out of another aspect of our lives. I think that that's where it's important to find your pillars, what is very important, and make sure that you're investing in each of those buckets. Otherwise, you will be very, very good at one or two things, but other things are going to suffer. And speaking of athletes, we do hear these stories all the time where they've invested so heavily in their fitness, into their careers, that their family life often suffers as a result of that. Right now I'm reading, it's baseball season, so I'm rereading Moneyball, which is one of my favorite. The movie with Brad Pitt is just outstanding. Even if you don't like baseball, I think it's one of those excellent top tier movies. But the main character, Billy Beane, is this athlete who's devoted his life to baseball through being a player, then being a manager, and his family life is something that's constantly in the background, like being shorted by this. Ultimately, he does come around. I don't know if that's just the movie, if it's true, but he comes around and he ends up foregoing a spot with the Red Sox in order to stay with the Oakland A's, which is like the lowest paid team in the league, in order to be close to his family. But anyway, I digress. Point being, we only have so much energy, and we have to, I believe we should think in terms of optimization instead of maximization. Well, I do want to get into your background here, Mehdi, because speaking of, maximization, holy cow, when we look at your pedigree here, your educational background, so not only are you an orthodontist, but you've studied quantum physics, and
Right.
which is, so you're one of those dumb guys, obviously. But let's let's dig into this a little bit. Tell us about your background, starting in Iran, and your educational path, and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I am originally from Iran, as you said, and when I was in high school, I wanted to be an orthodontist. Before that, maybe in elementary school, I wanted to be a scientist. I didn't know exactly what that is. I wanted to be a pilot later. But in high school, I knew that I was going to be an orthodontist. I went to dental school in Iran. I did my residency in Iran. And I was a faculty member for 1 year. But always I had this dream of studying physics. I love physics. I love quantum mechanics. I love special relativity, general relativity, all that. So my dream was go to the US, go to the best school for quantum mechanics and do a PhD there. And I was lucky enough, I was able to go to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I don't know if you have heard about it, but that's the number one quantum mechanic school.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I went there and I started my I started my PhD there, and after that I transferred to Baltimore, Johns Hopkins. I finished my PhD in biomechanics there, and then I had this idea about digitization of orthodontics in general, and I thought maybe I have to be able to practice in the US. So I went to UCLA. I did a second round of residency. Basically, if you do the math, I have like 5 university degrees. That's kind of crazy. I have been a student my whole life. Maybe when you say, Andy, Dom, maybe that's true. In 2000,
I was totally kidding about that. I was being facetious, by the way. Clearly that is not the case. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, and in 2019, I finished my residency at UCLA. And then I moved to Dallas. Right now I'm in Dallas, and I started my first company. You've heard about Brava, the lingual system that I started in 2015, and I moved the company to Dallas. Still, it's in Dallas, but I left the company. I started a new company called Celebrace, and I'm in Dallas now.
Obviously, I understand. You studied quantum mechanics and what's called condensed matter, correct?
Matter, yeah.
Now, I clearly understand what that is, but for Brian, could you just explain that in like third grader terms?
Yeah, sure. So maybe a simple example is, maybe you have heard about the Schrodinger cat. It's basically, you put a cat in a box and there is like a glass full of poison, and there is a 50% chance that this glass breaks, and there's a 50% chance that this cat is dead, and the box the door is closed. So from a classical point of view, 50% chance of being dead, 50% chance of being alive. But from a quantum mechanical point of view, the whole world is wave functions based on quantum mechanics. So there is wave function of cat that is alive, and simultaneously there is wave function of cat that is dead. So basically, in this box, there are 2 different worlds: dead cat and alive cat, and both of them exist there. When you open the door of the box, suddenly one of these wave functions collapses. And then what you see is a very normal everyday life. You see a dead cat or you see an alive cat. So basically, maybe this is how you can look at quantum mechanics. And, this sounds like science fiction, but obviously this is maybe the most accurate theory that there is in science, that, a lot of experiments have proved that this is right, although it sounds crazy.
Well, I'm curious, how do you prove that is right? Because you can't observe it directly. I mean, as soon as you observe it, one of these wave functions collapses and there's only one reality. Right. So tell me a little bit about the experiments that prove, and this is called superimposition, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Right, superimposition. And this has been sort of the influence for shows like Dark Matter, which is one of my favorite books. It actually started as a book by Blake Crouch. And now it's a show on Apple TV. The multiverse, which we see in, superhero movies and things like that. It's all influenced by this, but how do you prove this when you can't directly observe something?
Yeah, so the first time it was proved, which is kind of crazy, and even the biggest physicists back then, they were like kind of shocked. They couldn't like really accept it. Even Einstein said that the God never throws a toss to, it's not probabilistic, everything is deterministic. But his Nobel Prize was in quantum mechanics, actually. It was not in relativity. But anyways, the experiment that proved quantum mechanics is true, and basically everything is a wave. It's
was it the double slit?
Exactly.
Okay, double slit. I read real clear science. I find this stuff fascinating, man.
Yeah.
It's the observation that changes the outcome or influences the outcome, just observing something.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the double slit experiment. Basically, when you throw an electron and there is a plate, there are two slits in it. And then if it is classical, you should only see two trace of electrons on the curtain behind that. But in reality, you see it's like a wave. They interfere with each other. And that's the proof. And Brian, you said, some people connect it to consciousness. They say when a creature that is conscious, could be a human, when observes it, and it's related to the observer, because in quantum mechanics, always observer is
all relative.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all relative. Yeah.
When an observer understands something, suddenly those wave functions that we say collapses. So they connect our consciousness to quantum mechanics. And still consciousness is a mystery. Nobody knows exactly what that is. Some people say when you have a lot of compute, the emergence from a lot of compute is consciousness. Some people say even it could be microtubules in the cells that, and that's like Penrose that says that's another Nobel Prize laureate that kind of supports this idea. But yeah, that's why I love physics. All these it feels like science fiction, but it's reality. Yeah. You can go to the lab and you can do an experiment and you see it. Yeah.
I love that stuff too. And that's one of the reasons why I really like philosophy and spirituality, because I see those things as actually one and the same with science. Like this is all just trying to understand reality, right? And so the observation is important, and you don't make the observation without consciousness. And so like when you're meditating, what are you doing? You're observing your thinking. You're just observing. You're just trying to be an observer. That's it.
Right.
And, good things happen when, I guess, reality changes when you observe something. When you're blind to it, I think that's where the saying, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? I think that's kind of what that's alluding to, that like when you observe something, some action comes from that, right? Like that's when reality changes, is making an observation. But if you're blind to it, well, then it's almost like it didn't even happen. Did it happen? If no one observed it, did it happen?
And in quantum physics speak, it maybe literally didn't happen.
Right. That's what's so wild about it.
Yeah. And, this consciousness that we talked about, also some people talk about like a spectrum of consciousness, us humans, obviously, maybe as far as we know, we have the highest consciousness, although sometimes we don't have consciousness. We don't, like, for example, a cat, even if you look at your cat or you look at your dog, they have some sort of consciousness too. They know they exist, but that's like in the spectrum lower than humans. But just imagine if there are like some other creatures like aliens, or it could be AI in the future that its consciousness is higher than us. And actually, so far they're trying to figure out like these models that are getting much better and better every day. Do they have consciousness? Do they understand that they exist or not? And then a lot of people talk about that too. And then ethical things come up. That if you have like a model that is so good that has consciousness, can you just like delete that from the computer, or it's like basically you're killing a creature?
Sure, there's ethical concerns too. Yeah. Well, and in the realm of quantum physics, I'm curious if we get an AI that can actually have an observer effect. So with that slit experiment, what happens when it's only being observed by an AI? Now, do we see the wave pattern, or do we see the particle pattern? That would be interesting. If we've actually,
that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, this is actually one of the candidates to test the consciousness. I was talking to one of my,
really,
yes,
no kidding.
Yeah, one of my friends that because when you look at a model, it can't, because it has read a lot of novels, it knows how to deceive, and so
that's the problem.
Yeah, it might pretend that it has consciousness, but it doesn't. But
that's the problem. Yeah,
maybe like quantum mechanically, there are some we can do an experiment to find out if there is really consciousness here, or it's just deceiving us basically without having any consciousness. So yeah, these are very fun topics. Yeah.
Endless debate. But the problem, quote unquote problem, is that the AI would already know the results of the double slit experiment, and it would already know that observation affects the outcome. And so therefore it would probably say like, oh yeah, here's what I observed. And it's like, but did you really observe that?
Even like 50 years ago, when the computer detects like all the experiments, but doesn't understand it, it just records it, right? So it doesn't understand it. So that's different. But in the future, it might be different. When AI understands it, really understands it, it might be a different experiment.
Wow, fascinating stuff. Now, let's bring this back to the orthodontic world a little bit. I know we could go down a huge rabbit hole here. Mm-hmm. You're a very systematic guy, and I think that that's something that you've taken from your education. Tell us how your experience with quantum mechanics and education in general has influenced the way that you approach orthodontic practice, and specifically your systems.
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, sometimes I think about it, how my mindset changed, and maybe one of the things that kind of changed me, that was during my residency in Iran, and I had this patient. He was a medical student, and I was putting some torque on, I don't remember, it was a central lateral, I don't remember. And then he asked me, because he was a medical student, he asked me, what did you do? I explained that I'm putting some angle on your tooth. And he asked me, how much angle? And I was like, kind of felt bad that I don't know exactly how much angle I put there. I just did my best.
A little bit.
Yes, a little.
Define a little bit. Well, it's more than just a tiny bit.
Right. So it felt a little bit bad that, I didn't know this exact angle. Also, I think I asked for class 2 elastics, and then he was asking me how much force is it? And again, I was like, okay, it says 6 ounce, but I don't know, because it depends how you stretch it. If you do from K9 to 6, that's going to be different from K9 to 7. And also, if your teeth are bigger, you stretch it longer, the force is going to be higher. I don't know the answer. So I felt a little bit, this is an art, and we're dealing with biology. If we do all the calculations, it still is going to be a little bit inaccurate. But I from back then, that was maybe 2008 or something, around that time, 2007, I was thinking maybe we can do it better. Maybe we can have it more systematically, and we have all the angles figured out. And from back then in Iran, I had these ideas for that lingual system, and also this Celebrace that I'm working on. I had like the basics of the idea from there, but obviously in Iran, it's not possible to start that, and the technology doesn't let you to do that. But I was lucky enough, I came to the US, and, I was able to work on it.
So Mehdi, I wanted to ask you something about that. Reading about your background, I was impressed that you've built this career around questioning assumptions that everyone else accepts as fixed. Mm-hmm. So when I read that, I thought, is there a belief that you held for years, whether it's about orthodontics, whether it's about physics, whether it's about life, whatever,
right,
that you eventually had to abandon and rebuild, or go through a deconstruction and reconstruction? And what did that feel like? What was it, and what did it feel like?
Right. This is a very good question, Brian. I give you an example. The third law of Newton, action, reaction. Okay. All of us, we say, obviously that's true, but among physicists, they know it's not true. There is too many exceptions for that. And I believe that action, reaction is true. This is the rule. This is how the world works. But in reality, that's not how the world works. There is like a lot of examples that when there is an action, one object is applying force to another object, but this object is not applying the reaction force in the opposite direction. So that was something that it kind of broke my, like, shook me to the core that, you know, just you're believing things are right. And the way that, like, Galileo told people that Earth is spinning around the sun, and everybody was like, what are you talking about? This is impossible. And I was always thinking there is action reaction, that's not true. There might be a lot of other things that are not true. And just philosophically that, okay, if you're doing aligners or we're doing braces, or I don't know, that's how we build a house. Like, are we doing the right thing? Or I give you another example. Sorry, it's too nerdy, but you know, I love physics. But another thing was twin paradox. I don't know if you have heard about twin paradox. So if you have one twin, 20 years, both of them are 20 years old. One of them goes on a spaceship and goes to space with the speed close to the speed of light for 1 week and comes back. It takes 1 week for that one. But the other one that is on the Earth is going to be 20, it's not going to be 20 years plus 1 week. It's going to be like 80 years old. And this doesn't make sense. Again, this was an animation I watched. I think I was middle school or elementary school. I watched it. And again, I thought it is like a science fiction animation, but this is reality. In the lab, you can calculate it. And I just tell you another thing. If you're close to gravity, time passes slowly. For example, if you live on the first floor, you're going to stay younger compared to if you live on the 10th floor. But because the gravity of the Earth is so small, the effect after maybe like 30 years is like 2 seconds. So you're going to stay 2 seconds young. So it doesn't really, it's not worth it.
It's not significant, we would say. It's not, but it is observable.
It is observable. And, you know, it's like no doubt about it. Nobody can doubt about it. And then this philosophy that we all might be wrong. Like before Galileo, everybody was thinking like the Earth is the center of the world, right? But right now, everybody knows that that's not true. What are you talking about? And
Newton even called them laws, you know, Newton's third law. Is it a law? Is that like they're saying that this is concrete, this is like an absolute truth when they say something like a law, but now we're saying that maybe not. You know, it's amazing.
Although Newton was a genius for his time, he found this thing that works in classical mechanics, and this was kind of a law at that moment, but it is not a law. This is just not true in all the cases.
It's a law in that world view, and that's what I think so beautiful about relativity is like, for his observations, that was true pretty much every time. So he said it's a law, but there were things that he could not observe because he didn't have the technology. And so relativity says, well, it depends what system you're in. It depends what system you're in. So like you're describing moving from a Newtonian, you know, law of physics to more of this quantum, you know, field. And I just find it so fascinating.
It is so fascinating. It is so cool. And, you know, I like almost every night when I go to bed, I'm thinking about like what happens in the future and how things are changing so quickly. And are we doing the right thing? Are we focusing on the right thing? You know, actually, Andy, you were talking about maximizing and optimizing. We should say more no's to things. We should focus on the right things. And what is the right thing here? Are we doing the right thing? And, you know, like even, you know, last night, actually, I was thinking about like 1,000 years ago and 500 years ago, the technology was almost the same. But right now, things are changing so dramatically. Like even in 1750, 95% of people in the US, they were farmers. And they had no idea what jobs we have right now. Things have changed so quickly. If, you know, I was doing that thought experiment maybe 2 nights ago. It was 2 nights ago. I was thinking my front desk talks to the farmer in 1750, and then they explain their jobs. And she says, I'm in an orthodontic clinic. And he says, you don't plant corn? What are you? Everybody is like making food. You don't make food? And then she talks about like, I have a phone and I talk to people several miles away. And he is like, are you shouting when you talk? I said, no, I'm not shouting. It's phone. And, you know, I'm thinking in 50 years, somebody comes and talks to us. And we are, sorry, but we might like look dumb. We say, yeah, we're doing these things. And because the pace of technology is so fast right now that, like that 250 years ago, that things have changed so dramatically, like maybe in 50 years, it's going to change so much. Yeah. So that's why we should be flexible. We should,
yes.
We should not say, this is how we do it. This is this is how it's right. We should be open. That's how I look at things.
Not absolutist, right? I think how we apply this to orthodontics is say, well, based on what we know right now, this is what we think about it. But you can't have these dogmas because you see how easily things get flipped on their head when there's more information.
That is true. That is true. And just a simple fact, do we know how teeth erupt in orthodontics? This is like the simplest question. We don't know the exact physiology of how teeth erupt. With all these fancy certificates that all of us have, and we know like all about how to make the smile better, we don't know the simplest thing, that how teeth erupt. Like, we don't know. So we should be more open-minded, I think, to look at things. That's how I'm trying to be.
I love that. It seems to me like there's a little bit of Dunning-Kruger effect at play here. I mean, you're obviously a very well educated, intelligent guy. It's fascinating to me that the more you study, the more information you have, and also have the ability to process that information, the more you start to recognize, oh, there's a lot I don't know. And it's sort of validating to hear that from someone with your background, because you would almost expect the opposite with someone who knows quantum physics, orthodontics, and is probably one of the most dialed into the physiological and mechanical aspects of what we do. You would think that you have it all together and you can give us the answers. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, from where you stand, from what you can see that we don't really have a lot of these answers. And I think that creates when we realize that, it should create a humility and an open-mindedness to a thirst to improve and continually approach the full knowledge without actually ever achieving it. You're never going to know everything.
Absolutely. And I think this humility helps us to have that growth mindset, because, if you say, okay, this is, it's hard to change that mindset. Yeah. So, yeah.
The Buddhists call it beginner's mind, to always see it from a new perspective, right? I mean, to build on, and that's the paradox of life. You have to build on what you've already observed, speaking of observations, but you have to be willing to see it from a new perspective. And I think it's been attributed to Einstein. I don't know if he actually said it, but I think it's been said, no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. Mm-hmm. So you have to be willing to step outside and look at things from an outsider perspective and look at it almost as if you're seeing it for the first time. And I think that's why, I've realized as I've gotten older and I've started meditating, again, speaking of observation, metacognition, that type of thing, that if you're bored, you're completely not in beginner's mind. Because all these stimuli, you're thinking, well, I know what these are, and this doesn't interest me because I've seen this before. But have you really seen it? Or have you attached a meaning to what you're hearing, the sounds you're hearing, the things you're seeing, and you think you understand it because of the meanings you've attached to these words and concepts? Mm-hmm. But are those words and concepts blinding you? Are you making assumptions? You make a lot of assumptions. And that's what's so difficult about language. Anytime you describe something, now there's a way. Now it's like, how do you escape that? Anytime going back to Newton, you've described this, you have these laws, you have this stuff. Well, how do you escape that? Well, it takes looking at it from a completely different perspective, and that's tough. That's hard. I mean, anytime in our lives where we have to leave something and kind of go out into the great unknown, it can be daunting, but it's also a great adventure.
Yeah. Speaking of looking at things from a different perspective, bringing this back down to earth, let's talk a little bit about these digital braces systems, which you've been a part of in a number of ways. You mentioned that you were the founder of Brius originally. That was the lingual braces system.
Right.
Now you've moved on to Celebrace, which is another digital system. So tell me how you're taking these principles of physics and all these answers to the questions that you've been asking and synthesizing these into a digital treatment model. Tell us about that evolution there and why we should be paying attention to these things.
The way I look at this is, right now we all use aligners, right? And sometimes, when I talk to orthodontists, when they ask me about Celebrace, I tell them, for your aligners, do you use MBT or Roth? And the answer is, that is a very stupid question. I do like whatever torque that is the right thing for this patient. And I do the angulation and all these things is going to be custom for this patient. And then we are so used to MBT and Roth for our braces patients. And we are using the same angle for every single patient. And, these are genius ideas. If we look at like the history of traditional braces, we had standard age-wise. Imagine the torque is 0 everywhere, and you have to put all these bends. And I haven't done the tweet course yet. Hopefully I get a chance to go do it. I don't know if you have done it, but we understand like this is how tedious to put all those bends there. But straight wire was a genius idea. It looks at individual, like the average of people. Like, for example, for upper central, you should put like 12 degrees of torque. And that kind of works for us. But, if we need, we have to put some bends to customize it for this patient. But in reality, I think that is decreasing the efficiency. Although that's a very genius idea. If there is a technology that's why, I was thinking about like digitalization of orthodontics and braces and Celebrace. And basically Celebrace is a 3D metal bracket that is custom for that patient. And you do the treatment plan, you approve the treatment plan, and you don't say like what torque you want for that central. But the bracket will be designed to give you the torque that you approve in the treatment. Basically, it reverse engineers the torque and angulation and all that. And it kind of removes all the, like one size fits all, basically, for each patient. Because, again, the way I look at it with traditional braces, we get to a very good point after we step up the arch wires, but still at the end, either, we have to do a little bit of compromise. The patient says, this is good, doctor, please remove it. Or we have to do some bending here and there. But what if you have the exact torque and the exact prescription that you want for that patient? You just step up the arch wires. And obviously, for fixing the sagittal problems or expansion and all that, you need to do something. But at least I'm hoping that when you use Celebrace, you decrease some of these extra work that we need to do. So basically, that's how I look at this. Although this is like more to it, but this is just part of it.
Well, tell me this, Mehdi. I know that there are a number of digital offerings out there at this point, and a lot of them claim to be either custom or semi-custom. Where does Celebrace fit into this picture? How does it compare to some of the other offerings out there?
Yeah, so there are other great offerings, as you mentioned, and I talked to them, and basically we all trying to have this digitization for 75% of the market. Out of 4 patients in the US, 3 of them are braces, and they're not digital. And, all these companies, all of us were trying to bring digitization into 75% of the market, basically. And I respect all of them and I appreciate their effort. We are basically helping each other to increase the awareness for that. But for Celebrace, it is fully custom because, there are like steps to get to where I am, at least what I am thinking. Like, for example, you can have just a stock bracket with indirect bonding. And that is very helpful. That reduces just indirect bonding that Celebrace has. It reduces the involvement of the doctor. It happens a lot that a bracket breaks and you're in the consult room and you're kind of stuck there and you're talking, and then this assistant is waiting for you. Or there is a bonding, and all of us have seen this scene that you go back and you see there is a bib on the face of the patient, and the assistant has put the brackets, and they're waiting for us for like 15 minutes just to adjust the brackets. But if you have indirect bonding, you don't have that issue. They just do the bonding, and then you're not involved as much, and the flow of the clinic is going to be much better. And and the other aspect that I'm thinking is, you don't want to check the placement of the upper right 7 inside the mouth. You want to have it on a huge screen and come up with the best treatment plan on this screen. Or the other thing is, like, it has happened to all of us. Like, after 1 year, we noticed that there is Bolton discrepancy. Then we say, actually, you know what? I have to do a little bit of shaving. And then they say, you didn't tell me from the beginning. From the very beginning, all these things. You have the end in mind. And, some people might have a different opinion, but I believe future is going to be digital. Future for orthodontists is going to be digital. We won't place brackets by hand anymore. We won't do the treatment planning like these mechanotherapies that we do. Like, we gradually come up with the final ideal treatment plan that, nothing, with traditional braces, obviously we can get to a very good point. And obviously, we can have like perfect bites with traditional braces, but just we reduce the amount of work that we need to do. We make it more efficient. That's basically the goal for Celebrace. That's my goal. I'm hoping that I can contribute to this in the clinics, that they don't have to. They have to do less work, basically, to get to the point.
So I want to ask you about that a little bit, because you're mentioning this digital indirect bonding, which is sort of the entry point for digital treatment planning. And I think all the benefits that you mentioned are great, especially in concept. In reality, it relies a lot on the accuracy of the software, on the accuracy of placing these jigs in the mouth. And there can be issues that come up with that. One of the issues I want to focus on, because you mentioned that this should be reducing work, is the idea of out of the office work, this idea of homework. Right. I've said this before, where you don't see it as much, but I know when we first graduated, Invisalign was like the big thing, and that was the digital treatment planning. And one of the quote unquote flexes that I would constantly see online is like someone would be at the beach and, watching their kids play in the ocean, and they're doing a clean check on their laptop there. And, the idea is, hey, look how cool this is. I'm doing orthodontics from the beach, haha. And when I would look at that, again, I'm the contrarian, the devil's advocate. I'm looking at that and I'm like, so you're on vacation, you're stuck doing homework. Like, when I'm on vacation, I want to be reading a book maybe, or just being disconnected. That doesn't feel much like a vacation for me. So whereas they saw it as I'm enhancing my workday by being at the beach, I saw it as you're ruining your vacation by doing homework at the beach. So what I recognize, digging into this, is that when we talk about efficiency metrics, a lot of it has to do with chair time and number of appointments, and all those metrics are important. But what they don't factor into it is the number of hours that you're spending, the doctor is spending, and those are doctor hours outside of the clinic doing these clin checks. We see this complaint almost regularly on the forums from an associate doctor who's saying that they make a pretty decent per diem while they're there, but then over the weekend, they've got 12 hours of clin checks to do that they're not getting paid for. So in that vein, as owners, I think we undervalue the time that we put outside of the clinic, but certainly from an associate's perspective, that is a clear inefficiency there, that they feel like they're not being compensated for this. And I think that that's reflective of a metric that's not being tracked. What would be your response to that? And is that significant in this calculation of efficiency, in this quest to reduce our workload?
Yeah, so that is totally reasonable. I think that makes sense, like this thoughts that, you don't want to do ClinChecks on the weekend. Mm-hmm. But the way I look at it is that you, instead of spending time towards the end of the treatment and like every visit, you're coming up with like new idea, like changing the treatment plan sometime, potentially in some cases, you can do it at the very beginning. And I agree with you. No, this really sucks. You're on the beach, and for me, like you're doing your ClinCheck, But the way I do it usually between the patients, if I get a chance, I do it. I don't want to like do it that way, but we can also look at the amount of time. I haven't done that, like how much time on the ClinCheck, but what I see for braces compared to aligners, at least for me, I think it's a little bit, the time is a little bit less, but that's not like justification that we should do like digital. Because with aligners, you look at the initial, you look at the final, you look at how teeth move in the middle. With braces, you just look at the final. Yeah. And, the rest is going to be in the clinic. So for me, at least, it's like much faster. And also it depends on the quality of the software and AI, and like it gives you the right treatment plan, because again, AI is coming, and I believe we have to be very open-minded about it, and we have to embrace it. But AI can give you a good treatment plan, or it can give you a bad treatment plan, and you have to write several comments to get to the final ideal treatment plan that you're happy with. But the software that we are working on, and that has been always my dream, when you submit your scans and optionally your CBCT, after a few minutes, you see the sectioned bone and roots. And if you don't submit CBCT, you will have artificial roots on the crown. So we are trying to make this process faster and like sending it back to the doctor very quickly, and we ship it like quickly because, again, all these things that you say completely make sense. You don't want to bring something that has some efficiencies, but it causes some inefficiencies in the But when you approve the case, our average right now is like less than 5 days. We ship it to the doctor. Obviously, it won't be delivered. It takes like 1 to 2 days that it will be shipped, depending, because we are in Dallas. It takes like 1 to 2 days that it gets delivered. But we're trying to make this as seamless as possible to make it easier for the clinic. And also, as you said, when there's a new technology, indirect bonding, a lot of assistants, they're not familiar with indirect bonding. So that's something that, we try to help the clinics, and, we have to train the assistants to be comfortable with it. As you said, for example, if you don't seat the tray well, the bracket positioning is going to be wrong. Yes, sorry. You want to...
So Andy and Mehdi, I want to just piggyback on that a little bit and say I've taken the same approach, Andy, as you, that unless we have guardrails, like, okay, I'm going to structure my clinical day such that I have an appointment to do this digital setup. Right. It will just spill over at night or on the weekend or something. And then you have to say, well, how much money do I need to make? Yeah, you have to actually define these things, or else they do come with, it does come with baggage. Yeah, it does come with baggage and unintended consequences. And Mehdi, I think, what you're doing this is the future. Like you said, I see it. I mean, logically, I see it. And I've used some customized braces with KLO. I know that, there are different ways of doing it, and I want to be there. So my question to you is more about logistics. Like, I've got a busy practice. I want to do this. Why? Because I want to have less bottleneck, because I realize I am the bottleneck. The thing you described earlier, I'm the bottleneck. I don't want to be the bottleneck. I want to spend more time chatting with my patients. I want to spend more time being able to think about, the treatment plan, be able to, just make the day more smooth, right? And empower my clinical assistants to be able to move the appointment along without me having to do something, without having to wait for me to come do something. So I believe it. I mean, I can see the vision. But my question is, what kind of support does Celebrace provide so that somebody can introduce this and get it rolling? Because I think that's a lot of the, I don't want to say fear necessarily, but I'd say hesitancy. I've experienced, and as I've talked to colleagues, I think some of them have experienced, is not that they don't believe that it's the right way to go, because I do, man. To have something fully customized, going back to physics and quantum mechanics, every moment is a completely new moment. Everything is individual. Everything is custom in the entire universe. Everything. And so if we're going to live in reality, I think, well, it makes sense to make everything custom, just as it actually is in reality, rather than average. Well, we're going to kind of make it average, and it hopefully kind of fits the average prototypical person. There's no such thing as a prototypical person. That's a concept. That's not a real thing. It's a concept. So I believe it, but what kind of support do you guys provide so someone can actually say, okay, this hurdle of training my staff, the time it's going to take to get, because I think that's the key to success in implementation, is not necessarily getting people to believe that it's valuable, but showing them actually, how can I do this in my day-to-day without it being too disruptive?
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Obviously, we have thought about this too. And, we have our clinical team. They go to your clinic, they train your staff. And it's not going to be just once we train them. We make sure, because, these days, things have changed. There is turnover. There's a new assistant. Again, they don't know indirect bonding, and we try to train them. And I would say the software part of it is very intuitive. So you don't have to teach your staff how to submit the case. It's so easy. At least on Celebrace, I try to make it very, very simple. But for the indirect bonding, that's something that we have to do the training, and we support our team. Again, sometimes I think about this analogy, I don't know how many years ago, there was cars that started coming, compared to somebody who rides the horses, right? They might say, okay, you want to give me this car, my horse won't have a flat tire. It never breaks. It's not that expensive. It doesn't need fuel. It doesn't need a road. But yeah, that's true, and that is not the right option for that person to have a car. But if you just look at the big picture, cars are coming,
Yes.
Yeah. And, again, if somebody goes back in time and explains to that person, there is something called highway. And even a 17-year-old will have a car, and they will drive. And they say, so how about horses? And so it's illegal to ride your horse in the streets anymore. You cannot, you should just rent the place. And so it's going to change. And I think orthodontics is going to change, and there's going to be indirect bonding, or there's going to be something else that we are not thinking, but it's going to change. It's not going to be like eyeballing. It's not going to be bending wires. It has happened to us. We bend a wire, we fix that tooth, but the adjacent teeth are going to be affected negatively. So and again, that we are going to be the bottleneck again. Next visits, nobody else can fix it unless I go there and I unbend, or I decrease the bend there that I overdid last visit, right? So even it happens to the best orthodontists, when we have a busy practice, all these things happen. And I think just having more streamlined practice and having the right torque from the beginning, having the right training for the staff, and we do the indirect bonding correctly, that, the brackets are not bonded in the wrong place. I think in long term, for sure, at the beginning, it might be some this assistant who learned is not today, the other assistants are not well trained, there might be some, but I think if you just look at the big picture, we are going towards that. Just again, I believe we should embrace digital systems. In my own clinic, either I do an expander, or I do Celebrace phase 1, or I do very few aligners. I'm very focused on braces here. We do everything. We scan the patient, every single patient. We don't have like, and I think that's the direction of fields. That's how I think about it, and we should just embrace it. And that I have been working on this since like more than 10 years right now, basically, to scan all your patients, basically.
Yeah, I think that, what you're touching on here is this idea of the general direction that we're headed in versus where we are today, and crossing that chasm, I think is what they call that. As you were talking about cars, I couldn't help but think about Teslas too. And, we were having this conversation we always do. Teslas always come up. I'm clearly outnumbered. Everyone seems to drive. I'm like one of the few holdouts now who still has a hybrid vehicle. But anyway, point being, what I was saying is that I think that the infrastructure has come a long way, but it's still not quite where it needs to be for me to completely jump on board, because the minor inconveniences do still drive me crazy. The thing, like, I like to drive to Las Vegas, and I don't like the idea of having to stop in Kingman for 45 minutes to charge my car, assuming that there's a charger available for my car. Mm-hmm. There's all number of things, but it's getting better. But those initial guys who first jumped into it, they kind of suffered a little bit. They had to be sort of the fanboys, like the true people who are ironically willing to inconvenience themselves to go in the direction of what will be more convenient at some point. And I do think that
visionaries,
in the next few
right,
years,
Chris? Visionaries. I think that's what we would call that.
I think dumbasses is another way of saying it, but like
a little bit of both.
Again, I think that one pushback that I'll have is that I think when I was earlier in my career, I'd want to jump on every new shiny object that came up, because I was like, I'm going to be the progressive one. This is how I'm going to identify, and I'm going to be ahead of all the old fogies who are stuck in their ways and too big to change and all this stuff. And then what I recognized is a lot of the times I was shooting myself in the foot, with some of those early digital systems. I was creating so much more work for myself. And because I wasn't super busy, I could absorb that. But as I started to get busier and busier, I started to really value simplicity and recognize that training systems are important, and having the most universal training system is good. So we're talking about support to train your staff. One thing that I would run into sometimes with these early digital systems is that I'd be the only one in my area using it. So when I have to replace an assistant, if I was using traditional twin brackets, I could plug that person in on day one. They know what they're doing pretty much. If I'm doing all indirect bonding, it would take me weeks before that person was trained up enough to do our systems. And that all is kind of sand in the gears here. Mm-hmm. Again, I think that the direction is going all digital. I think that that's clear because the promise, the concept is there. And I think that we may be at this inflection point where things are really going to start to take off, with AI getting more powerful, right, with what we've learned over the past couple of decades with these early digital systems. Right. It's going to be very interesting to watch. But I want to ask you about adoption curve too, because like with AI, like with any new technology, the technology could exist, but then people may not want to use it just for psychological reasons or inertia. I'm going to throw nuclear energy as one of those ideas there. Like, every scientist will say nuclear energy is the safest and the most powerful way to solve the energy crisis that we're having. Yeah, better for the environment. It's generally pretty safe now, but because there's this psychological stigma because of early meltdowns, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, this sticks in our head, and we are resistant to adopting something that could solve so many of our problems not because the technology's not there. Talk to me about that. How does this adoption curve work, and what is your plan as the entrepreneur to get past this inertia?
Yeah, so maybe I give you an example. I was at my previous company, I had the first VP of sales of Invisalign, and he was our VP of sales. He's a very nice person, and had obviously we don't like Invisalign, but he was telling me the first early days of Invisalign, how it worked, and he was telling me that I had to call this clinic, and then they said, "Oh, we bought a computer because of you." And then I said, okay, now turn on the computer, like on the phone, and then go to your browser. And then the doctor was like, browser? What is a browser? Okay. That's like 1999, 2000, something like that. And then we have come a long way, like when you're talking about like adoption curve. Right now, I don't have to explain how to submit cases on Celebrace. It's every orthodontist knows how to do it. And actually, I try to make it simple, and that's basically my philosophy. I don't know who says that. I think Hemingway, that says that I didn't have enough time, so I wrote a very long letter to you. So I really try to make the software simple. I always drop the buttons. I try to make it simple. So this helps with the adoption. And then as you said, right now you hear more and more people here talk about indirect bonding. And I believe we are at that inflection point, and still there is challenge, to cross the chasm. There is a lot of doctors still on the other side that they don't really want to use indirect bonding, but also right now it's just increasing. Maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, it was really hard to talk about indirect bonding. Like if you talk to any orthodontist, they said, oh, once during my residency with my co-residents, he did one job, I did one job. Like that was the only indirect bonding they did. But right now, you see that a lot of clinics, they are understanding the advantage of digital orthodontics and indirect bonding, and basically not eyeballing the brackets on the teeth. Because then, maybe quickly you can do the bonding and you don't have to train your staff. But, there is evidence that, towards the end of the treatment, you have to do some work. Sometimes when I talk to orthodontists, I say with MBT or ROT, which are genius ideas, it's like you take a cab and you're like 5 blocks from your destination. Towards the end, you have to kind of walk, and that might take a very long time. Like it might sometimes take longer than like getting to that like halfway with the cab. So it takes. So the way I look at it, when you have those custom prescriptions for the patient, basically you put some energy and time and you train your staff, but in long term it pays off. You can I see that different digital systems, they are showing data that and there should be more coming, that efficiency is more, the number of visits, it doesn't need to be that much. And like just intuitively, imagine you have a metal bracket that fits perfectly on the surface of the tooth because it's 3D printed. You cannot easily break it. So just because surface is bigger, the surface that it attaches to the tooth is bigger. So that's like emergency visits decrease. So do you care about like emergency visits?
So are you saying that the bond strength is good because it's 3D printed? Rather than like a custom composite base, because traditionally with indirect bonding, you're creating a custom base with composite to some degree, right?
Right. But like when you have thicker composite in some areas, thinner in some place, when it's thicker, it becomes weaker. But when you have fully custom that it fits perfectly on the tooth, it's going to be stronger.
What I've heard is the axiom or the saying, thin it to win it.
Right.
Like the thicker the composite base, the more connective material there is between tooth and bracket, the weaker the bond. So you want a more intimate relationship between the bracket and the tooth for a better bond strength. So tell me about that. Do you find that you have really good bond strengths? How does that compare to direct bonding, for example? Andy mentioned earlier. So I went to University of Minnesota, and Brent Larson was the chair of the program, and he was a big fan of indirect bonding, and he would talk about the efficiencies of indirect bonding. And you mentioned a cab. he gave an analogy one time of like a par 3 in golf. He's like, okay, like the goal is to get it in the cup, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with direct bonding, you're hitting it over here in the sand trap, and then you're hitting it over the hole, and then you're chipping past, and then you get it in like 6 shots. But the goal is to get it in 3.
Right.
And maybe even get a birdie, you know?
Yeah.
And with indirect bonding, you reduce the inefficiencies. So tell me about bond strength, because I think that's one thing that's traditionally been great in theory with indirect bonding, where a lot of people have been like, oh man, this seems like the holy grail, so to speak. Like this seems like this will reduce all my problems. But then if the bond strength is weaker, kind of like what Andy alluded to earlier, it just adds, like in theory it's great, but in practice it's not. What have you found there?
So we have done a research, but obviously we need like more evidence, but the number of debonds and breakages is lower. And intuitively that's what— Lower
than indirect bonding or lower than direct bonding?
Direct bonding with traditional braces. We compared Cello brace fully custom indirect bonding with traditional braces, and we compared like how many debonds we had for each, and we saw that significantly it's lower. But in that clinic, obviously they knew how to do indirect bonding, so that's the thing. Sometimes it's hard. You compare like indirect
variables. That's a confounding variable right there.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
They have no
technique
idea.
Sensitivity and
Yeah, if they don't know how to do indirect bonding and they do that, and you compare these two, maybe there's not going to be a significant difference. There might be like more breakage. I don't know. But in the clinic, when they are well trained, we found that definitely there is less debond. And again, as you said, like when it's thinner, when from a material science perspective, when it's thinner, the adhesive is thinner, the bond is going to be stronger, and also the surface area is going to be bigger.
Yeah, that's a big deal in orthodontics, with aligners, with brackets, whatever. Increase the surface area. And again, it kind of all boils down to relationship. How intimate is the relationship? The more intimate it is, the stronger it is. And of course, it's no different in real life. It's the same in orthodontics as it is in real life there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, Brian. One more thing I wanted to tell you is about like the prescription of these custom brackets. That what other research that we did, we looked at the cases that the doctors approved, and we looked at the torque that they wanted for each tooth, and we compared it with MBT, and we compared it with Roth, and we noticed that like there is a very small percentage of those teeth that really match MBT. For example, in one patient, like centrals were like in MBT, lateral was not MBT or Roth. It was like 10 degrees different. And then canine was just Roth, close to Roth. So, and that kind of tells you that if you just do MBT or Roth, you might not get exactly what you want. You get an average, but no patient is average.
So you're saying the expression didn't produce what you would expect, or what you think it's going to produce, maybe, based on your assumptions.
The doctor approved the treatment plan. You look at the torque, and then you compare with MBT. And we assume that the MBT, we get that torque. And they were not matching. Like in a big percentage of like patients, it was not MBT and it was not Roth. It was completely a different prescription. And just the fact that why do we have MBT and Roth? If we have one holy grail prescription, why we have two of them, or we have like more of them? Why we don't have just one? And that was our finding, that if you really want to get to your destination, ideally you want a custom torque to get there. With MBT, for some teeth you might get, for some of them you might not get, or the same for Roth.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier, how those are groundbreaking ideas, and they did get people closer to customization by sort of lumping everybody into like, well, here's the average. Well, because average is kind of close to everybody, but in reality, you're not treating an average. You're treating an individual standing in front of you right here, right now. This person, this place with these teeth.
Right.
That's who you're treating. So I think
Well, this kind of comes back to the 80-20 rule, doesn't it? That we were talking about in the beginning is I think that, a straight wire appliance is going to be the 20% that gets 80% of the results, or it fits 80% of the population just fine. But then there's going to be that, or 80% of the tooth movement just fine. And then that final 20% is where the real effort happens. I mean, the detailing at the end of these cases is usually where all the effort is. I mean, most of us have autopilot up through the pan and repo appointment. So very minimal effort, after diagnosing the case. And then most of the effort is towards the end, is just doing those fine-tuning little details to get that extra 20%, because we are specialists and we have to get that 100%. So it's interesting to see where technology is going to fill in that gap a little bit so that we can put in 20% of the effort and get 100% of the results. So maybe this is the holy grail. Maybe we're just, we have to see, we just have to see where it goes. But
well, I think it makes so much sense, because I remember reading or hearing that 70%, on average, 70% of an orthodontist's time is spent bonding braces and bending wires. That's probably been true in my experience. And that's why I hate being the bottleneck.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that, so I think this is really good that our industry is going this way. Of course, the world's going this way. And it's going to be interesting to see how things pan out over the next few years, and who's an early adopter, and at what point, Andy, you mentioned the inflection point, at what point the pressure on each individual doctor, practice, whatever, will be enough for them to be like, okay, because I'm about there. I'm thinking like, I got to change the way I do stuff. I'm getting burned out.
You could look at it as pressure, or you could look at it as the path of least resistance. And that's what I was saying earlier with where I value simplicity is I'm really more talking path of least resistance. The same way that we extract a primary canine to encourage the permanent one to go back on course. It's not that we're there. You could expose and bond that tooth and force it into the place, which is, I mean, we harp on Invisalign so much, but I feel like that's kind of been their tactic lately is, let's strong arm people into using our product and only our product. Let's make it impossible to submit scans from other scanners. Now let's make it impossible to even transfer scanners. So it's like it's forcing you into this path, and that doesn't work. They're backtracking on a lot of those policies because you can't force people to do things. They're going to find alternatives. They're going to resent your product and they're going to move on. But I think that if you create a path of least resistance, show this actually is easier now. And all of the assistants that you're hiring, they have been working with indirect bonding and they prefer indirect bonding. And, we do see a couple of those. It's not the majority, but there are a couple of assistants who come from highly digital practices and they get actually more frustrated with the analog treatments that we're doing than vice versa. So I think that when we're talking about that inflection point, we have the technology, which we discussed, and that's probably getting pretty close. And then we have the adoption curve, which is always going to lag. But once that adoption curve inflection point hits, then it's not that I'm pressured into doing it. It's that, okay, well, I this is actually going to be easier for me than it is to train people in the analog version. Right. So I think that's
enough critical mass.
Yeah, the critical mass. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And, not just in orthodontics, that's my prediction. We'll see if it is going to be right or wrong. But I think in the future, when you have a headache, you won't get just an Advil or ibuprofen. It's going to be just for you because you're special. It's going to be individualized for you, and everything is calculated based on your genetics, and you have all your body is scanned, and it's going to be just for you. But it's going to be way far in the future. But I think in 2026, it's time for orthodontics to be a little bit more towards that. Again, we don't have the biology because we do all these torques and tips and all that, but still the biology decides that the bone density here is different from here, and then it kind of changes our plan. We still have to do something manually about it, but at least we get closer. We get closer, and just I tell you about my experience. I opened my practice last year right next to a very, very established orthodontist here. And I think the internal referral is really helping us because they come to our practice. Because when I show the cases, I go to the Celebrace and I show them, because with AI, as I said, sections all the teeth and all that, like not immediately, after a few minutes. So I think patients and mom really care that we have this customization and we are modern. Mm-hmm. I think from like a marketing point of view, right now is a good time to do that. Like in 2012, maybe if you say I do aligners, everybody like comes to your clinic. Right now, nobody cares because everybody does aligners.
Correct. Yeah.
And right now, I think if you say everything is digital in this, everything is modern in this clinic, like that big percentage of patients that are braces are also digital. I think that is a very good marketing tool to, like, even if you don't think about like efficiency in the clinic, just I have seen this from like a conversion point of view. So I think that really has helped us as like a new doctor here with an accent. I think it has really, at least I feel that it has really helped us.
I can see that. And I think that that's an interesting benefit of being the early adopter. And I think that if you can frame it just right, then clearly, that's sort of that's the reward that you get for going through those initial hurdles. I can't help but think of the movie The Founder. You guys ever watch that with Michael Keaton on Netflix? At McDonald's. Yep. It was Ray Kroc. He plays Ray Kroc, who's the guy who he didn't invent McDonald's, but he kind of turned it into this
systematized.
Yes, exactly. And well, actually, Nick Offerman is the main McDonald's guy, and then him and his brother, they are the ones who made McDonald's, and they made it very systemized. And that was the idea, is that this is an automated machine that is highly efficient, that can churn out these burgers in real time for cheaper than what the diners are offering. It was a superior model by every standard. And these were actually good burgers back then too. It's not Ray Kroc kind of ruined that aspect of it. Anyway, moving on. But when they opened up, they had a unique model where diners at that point were drive-in, and then you would have this waitress roll up in her roller skates and take your order and then go back and bring you the food on a tray, put it on your car, all this. Here, they needed people to walk up to the window, place their order, and then they would get it almost immediately. But when people were driving in, they're saying, hey, where do I park? Where's the waitress? Where's the roller skates? And they're like, no, it's not like that. You just park over there, then walk up here. And they were just trying to corral people. And it was very frustrating for them because they had never seen this model before. And people were walking away because, this is just a pain in the ass. I'm going to go down the street. And now eventually it caught on, but there's that friction in the beginning. There's that friction. You have to sell people on a better system and train people in order to use it.
Catch the vision.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think it's just going to be very interesting to watch this adoption, because I agree with you. I think there's a lot of benefits. And I think that once the technology gets there, we're going to see that sooner than the adoption. But certainly it's just evolution. If this is superior, it's going to be the future. And now in that vein, there was one other question I wanted to ask you about digital, because one of the big pushbacks that people have is the cost. Now there's efficiencies that can be recognized, but they can add hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars to the expense of the case. So, what are your thoughts? First of all, if you're willing to share some of your pricing strategy here, for those who are adopting it early and are going through the friction, maybe not recognizing those efficiencies, how does the cost factor into it? How should people think about this?
I really try to keep the cost as low as possible, because, if you receive the box, you see there, it's written on it, building a billion smiles. That's my...
Okay.
I don't know, probably I won't get there.
Wait, did you rip that off of McDonald's? That sounds like McDonald's thing.
Oh, really? Is it billion?
Isn't it like 8 billion served or something like that, which is like only 8 billion people in the world? Or Something.
I
There's
don't know.
something with billions. Maybe they got rid of it. Sorry. Moving on.
Yeah, so that's my goal. And, the cost is going to be obviously very important. At this point, an orthodontist might say, I pay like a few cents, like I get these brackets from like another country and they are very cheap. And, but if somebody really uses Celebrace, I'm trying to keep it as like at like $400 something dollars. Like I'm really trying to make it, and it's not easy because you need a lot of automation that we have in our software and the AI in our software. And actually, sometimes when I talk to the doctors, I tell them you get 2 sets of brackets and 2 sets of IDBs that are loaded. And if you just do the math, this is really, at least we have done our best to keep it as low as possible. Because, if you just compare with, like, let's say you use other indirect bonding systems that have your own bracket, let's say, you won't get 2 sets. You just get 1 set, and it becomes like 400. It depends on if you use like more expensive brackets. But that's what we really try to do. Obviously, if the volume is lower, the cost goes up. But if really somebody embraces Celebrace and uses it for all of the patients, it's going to be much lower. And I believe it really pays off because, all those things that we mentioned that, for finishing and the data that we have gathered, kind of supports that. But, obviously you need to train your staff well. Indirect bonding, they should do it well. They cannot just wing it and hope that, the finishing is going to be easier. They have to do the indirect bonding. They have to be confident about their placement of brackets. But if they do it, as we discussed, I think it's very intuitive. Just you have all the bracket positioning correct, the prescriptions are correct, you get to your final destination faster. And again, in my clinic, I'm very make sure that all the assistants do the indirect bonding correctly. And I clearly see that we are finishing cases very fast. And that brings us like Google reviews, brings us like internal referrals. So I think it has really helped us. And, they know us as the modern clinic in locally here and where I am.
I think that's awesome, Mehdi. And I think that's a competitive place to be. I'm really looking forward to seeing how things all work out. We'll be watching your journey with eager anticipation. Now, you will be at the AAO that's coming up. I think we're all going to be there. Tell us how can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to hear a little bit more, or just pick your brain and hear a little bit about quantum physics and that sort of thing. How do we get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm very excited about AAO, and we're gonna have a booth there. And actually, even excitement was more because we won the Innovator Award, AAO Innovator Award.
Congratulations!
Thank you so much. It was really, it felt so good that the community kind of showed the appreciation for like making the finishing easier. So we are gonna have a booth there. If you want to go to our website, it's celebrace.com. It's like celebrate braces combined at celebrace.com.
Okay.
And if you want to email us, that would be info@celebrace.com. And we have a great team, and they can reach out to you and we can help you.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to that. I'll see you guys both at AAO. That's going to be in Florida this year. Either one of you guys interested in doing some crabbing while we're out there? You ever done that?
Like the crab walk you were talking about with Chris at the beginning, or like actually the Roy King kind of thing?
We can do either one. And for those of us who are confused, for those out there who are confused why I keep bringing this up, I had a little bet going with Jacob Koch last night that I could work the word crab into the conversation 5 times during this podcast. He didn't think I could do it. But so for those of you who are paying attention, congratulations. And for those of you who want to re-listen to the show and see how I got that in, I did get it 5 times. So now he owes me a drink at the AAO. And maybe we actually will go crabbing. We'll see. But
good job, Andy. Good job.
Thank you. That's why I do it. Anyway, so thanks for all of our audience for tuning in today. Hopefully we'll see you all at the AAO. And then reach out to Mehdi to hear a little bit more about his stuff and go visit him at his booth, at his Celebrate booth. If you are a vendor in the space and you want to reach over 9,000 orthodontists from across the world, reach out to us for some sponsorship opportunities. Sponsorships start as low as $100. They go towards the Facebook group, our podcast, obviously, and then also the MOPC meeting, which is now called the Orthodontic Pearls meeting. Right, Brian? We changed that name.
That's right.
Is that it? Oh, it
just makes more sense.
It does.
OPC instead of MOPC. Orthodontic Pearls Conference.
Orthodontic
OPC.
Pearls Conference. There we go. Yeah, just keep all the branding consistent. I like that.
Keep it consistent.
I like that.
Simplicity.
Simplicity. Exactly. I love simplicity. All right, guys. Well, thanks again for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next one.